Hi, and welcome to this latest CCS Insight webinar on the hot topic of satellite communications. My name is Kester Mann. I'm Director of Consumer and Connectivity here at CCS Insight, and I'm joined by my colleagues Vishali Purohit and Joe Gardner. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll share our perspectives on this exciting industry opportunity, outlining what it means for telecom operators, how it affects the device market, and how the different constellations are building out. Before we start, just a very quick introduction to CCS Insight for those of you who may not be familiar with us. We are a research and advisory company based in London, with offices also on the west coast of the US and in India. We've been researching the telecoms and technology markets for 30 years, have around 30 members of staff now, including 15 analysts. And our research covers a wide range of areas, including, as you can see, connected devices, telecom services, network innovation, and enterprise transformation. And all of our research, reports, notes, presentations, dashboards, surveys, and other research is housed on our Connect platform. Now, CCS Insight doesn't operate on a seat basis for its clients, so anyone can gain access to our services. So today's webinar coincides with the publication of our latest in-depth Spotlight report, which centres on satellite connectivity with a leading focus on the direct-to-device opportunity. It includes market forecasts for adoption and revenue, an assessment of the roadmap from emergency messaging to data services, expectations for satellite in home broadband and the Internet of Things, comparisons of existing, established and emerging constellations, and analysis on telecom operator partnerships, go-to-market strategies, and business models. Today, we'll touch on several of those areas in terms of our Spotlight, which will just give you a flavour of some of the more detailed analysis contained within the report. Before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping as well. We'll take questions at the end. Please use the questions tab, which is at the bottom of the screen. It's private and anonymous if you wish to ask a question. And all participants will receive a link to access a replay of the webinar at the end. And just in terms of our methodology for our research as well, over the past 2 to 3 months, CCS Insight has carried out extensive primary research across the industry, holding more than 30 interviews spanning telecom operators, satellite constellations, device makers, and other ecosystem players. We've taken a global outlook covering all major world regions with a dedicated focus on select leading markets. The research is underpinned by our extensive industry knowledge and connections, as well as our collaboration with the Global Mobile Suppliers Association, the GSA, with which we are the official research partner. First, let me pass over to Vishali to talk about our categorization of satellite use cases, revenue opportunities, and thoughts on the direct-to-device market.
Thanks, Kester. I thought it would be important to begin by providing some context to the satellite industry by delving into the various use cases that benefit. It is important to note that this webinar focuses primarily on direct-to-device, but the satellite report does a deep dive into these 3 key uses. Satellite broadband is a way of delivering high-speed internet access through transmitting signals between a satellite dish at the user's location and a satellite in space, thus bypassing the need for physical infrastructure. Thanks to SpaceX Starlink's recent success, it has become more common and has been producing revenue for some time, as evidenced by the chart. In 2022, it contributed $3.3 billion in revenue, and this rose to $7.9 billion in 2024. By 2028, it is anticipated that it will be providing $13.3 billion to the satellite industry. Satellite IoT is used to connect machines and remote sensors. It remains niche and expensive, and as of 2024, it provided just $0.8 billion in revenue. However, through tighter integration with terrestrial networks with a 3GPP IoT NTN, this is expected to rise 63% to $1.3 billion by 2028. Direct-to-device refers to smartphones that can communicate directly by connecting to satellites, which allows for improved coverage and lower latency. Thanks to its recent inclusion in Apple iPhones, for emergency SOS, its mass market appeal has made it the most prominent use case, and as of 2024 had 198 million connections. The segment is still in its infancy, and its lack of commercial models has meant that it has generated no revenue as of yet, but is expected to grow significantly over the forecasted period and is projected to generate $16.8 billion in revenue. On the whole, the total revenue from these use cases is still relatively small compared to the telecom industry as a whole, but they do present a long-term opportunity. Satellite connectivity is a long-term play, and it may be quite some time before the revenue figures become truly meaningful. When it comes to direct-to-device, there are two approaches that can be taken, and there are key distinctions in the spectrum they use, the players and partnerships involved, and the device support required. I will be talking about direct-to-modified devices, and then we'll be handing over to my colleague Joe, who will talk more about direct-to-unmodified devices and what this means. If we start with direct-to-modified devices, these are smartphones that are built with the necessary capabilities to provide communication with mobile satellite services, and this usually refers to having the necessary hardware. Within this, smartphones can be either satellite capable or satellite enabled. To be satellite capable, it means that the device has the necessary hardware required for satellite connectivity. Conversely, satellite enabled smartphones need to have both the necessary hardware, a supported software layer, and an active satellite service agreement available in that region that allows for connectivity. Direct-to-modified devices have their own dedicated satellite bands, which are owned by providers and are typically either L-band or S-band. The main players doing this approach have partnered with existing satellite constellations and are mainly device manufacturers like Apple or Google, chipset manufacturers like MediaTek, or infrastructure providers like Skylo. The devices supported are certain modified devices, which will be touched on in the next slide. In comparison, direct-to-unmodified devices can access satellite connectivity due to using existing terrestrial frequencies and infrastructure that are already supported on the devices, and so they require no hardware modifications. This approach involves sharing operator-owned spectrum in the low to mid-band. The iPhone 14 was released in 2022 and was satellite capable as it allowed for emergency SOS. Every iPhone since has also been satellite capable, and we don't expect this to change with every new release. With the launch of iOS 18, satellite capabilities have been taken to the next level with two-way messaging over iMessage. Similarly, Google Pixel has also recently launched the Google Pixel 9, which has satellite capabilities, particularly those that enable emergency SOS. We assume that this will be available in all Google Pixel models going forward. The Pixel 8 had a satellite-capable modem, but it was not functional at the time. Huawei have also released the Mate 50 series in 2022, which had the ability to send one-way text over satellite. The Mate 60 range supported two-way messaging, and we expect that this will be applicable to all new releases in the Mate series. As it stands, these functions are only available in China. Other Chinese players like Honor, Vivo, and Xiaomi have introduced a limited number of satellite-capable models into their portfolio. But satellite is a premium service, and so it is only available in the most premium of smartphones in its domestic market. It is likely that this service will primarily be available in China, but later we could see it in more emerging markets. Notably, Samsung has yet to launch a satellite-capable phone, but we expect this to be offered in the Galaxy S25. If we look closer at the number of devices that are satellite-enabled, it tells a story whereby Apple is dominating the market, with 97% market share in 2024. As of 2024, the total currently stands at 198 million, and this is expected to grow to 925 million by 2028. However, by 2028, we expect other players like Samsung, Google, Huawei, and other Android brands to slowly catch up and begin increasing penetration across other devices in their portfolio. North America is leading in this space, having been the first to have an active satellite service, and thus capturing 59% of the market share this year. Other regional analysis is provided in the report, and my colleague Kester will be touching on the US much later on. The installed base of satellite-enabled smartphones is significantly lower than that of satellite-capable smartphones. This disparity exists because while many smartphones are equipped with satellite capabilities, becoming satellite-enabled requires an active satellite service. At present, such services are only available in regions like the United States, Canada, parts of Europe, and Australia. As of this year, the installed base of satellite-enabled smartphones stands at 0.2 billion, compared with 0.3 billion satellite-capable smartphones. By 2028, our projections indicate that satellite-capable smartphones will grow to 1.5 billion, while satellite-enabled smartphones are expected to surpass 0.9 billion. Satellite direct-to-device has progressed rapidly over the last few years, but we're only at the beginning. In 2022, Apple and Huawei were the first to introduce emergency SOS via satellite connectivity. Today, there are a number of smartphone manufacturers that offer both emergency SOS and two-way texting. Apple and Huawei led in this space with two-way messaging, whereas Google has only just started to offer emergency SOS services. Both these services are what's considered low data rate or narrowband services. Looking to 2027, we anticipate that satellite connectivity will start to be able to provide higher data rate services, like voice and data. With the launch of additional LEO satellites and expanded spectrum capacity through 5G NR, voice and data are almost within reach. The future of connectivity is quickly evolving. Soon we won't just reach out in emergencies. We'll be fully connected wherever we are. I'll now pass to my colleague Joe, who will be talking about unmodified devices and the current leading constellations in this space.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much for Charlie. Right, so the satellite progress roadmap is definitely an interesting one, particularly when we look at voice and data. And a bigger factor affecting the timeline of voice and data availability is actually the unmodified device segment. The unmodified market is significantly larger than the modified market. By 2028, we project there will be 8.8 billion compatible devices. This creates a massive addressable market, but even more importantly, creates an opportunity for people who can't afford the latest iPhone or Google Pixel device to be able to access satellite services and stay connected, which I think is probably one of the most exciting things about satellite technology. The unmodified market is going to experience significant growth over the next few years, especially in the United States, thanks to deals and partnerships that Kester will discuss later. CCS Insight forecasts the US will have just under 400 million subscribers having SMS capabilities, or SMS satellite capabilities, I should say, by 2028. A small part of this will come from customers paying for it as an add-on, but the majority will be bundled into existing plans. These figures only include partnerships that are public knowledge, so we do expect the global number of subscribers to increase when more announcements about unmodified constellations take place. And speaking of unmodified constellations, there are three ones that are sort of concentrating in the direct to unmodified area. They are AST SpaceMobile, Link, and Starlink, which are all LEO or low Earth orbit constellations. All these companies are looking to use terrestrial spectrum to connect everyday unmodified phones to their satellite technology. They're trying to partner with a variety of operators, which Kester again will talk about later. AST SpaceMobile is doing this particularly well, partnering with Vodafone, which is also an investor in AST SpaceMobile, as well as AT&T, Verizon and Rakuten being partners. This gives AST SpaceMobile numerous high-profile, high-powered operators to give them great routes into market in a variety of different countries. Link Global, which is the smallest company out of these three constellations, is also going down the unmodified direct-to-device path and is currently undergoing a funding round to help grow its quite small constellation. The company does have an advantage over these other two constellations, as it does have an active satellite service already active, but it can only offer non-continuous connectivity currently, and that has been rolled out in places such as the Cook Islands and Palau. One huge advantage Starlink has, kind of unsurprisingly, is that its parent company is SpaceX. Now, this is, I'm sure you've all heard of it, it's a groundbreaking rocket company that has changed the satellite and space industry. And SpaceX will be able to put Starlink to the front of the queue, giving it great flexibility and allowing Starlink to launch, and it has allowed Starlink to launch over 6,000 satellites. But it is important to consider the number of satellites a constellation has, as even though AST SpaceMobile has only launched 5 satellites, these satellites are a lot larger than Starlink's, and they make up a good proportion of AST SpaceMobile's target constellation. One problem all these constellations will face, though, is the issue of spectrum interference. This is due to these companies using terrestrial spectrum that could cause interference in areas of high spectrum density, such as cities. This will mean constellations will be forced to put in exclusion zones in certain areas. This probably won't occur for low data rates like SOS and SMS, but could become very problematic when voice and data functions are attempted to be rolled out. But now let's talk about somebody I'm sure everybody knows, and that's Elon Musk. Is he a hindrance or is he a help to Starlink? Well, Mr. Musk has significant net worth, and he's built 2 companies in the space and satellite industry. They're both innovative and transformative. He is also influential around the world, and with the recent election of Donald Trump, it looks like he'll have significant influence in the new US administration. And this will allow him to be well placed to push his agenda, such as cutting regulation, increasing spectrum, and improving sort of spectrum availability for Starlink. And this could affect those exclusion zones I just mentioned briefly a second ago. However, his antics, particularly on X or Twitter, can make it harder for operators to partner with him. Recently in Brazil, his actions on Twitter had a spillover effect impacting Starlink. Now, Starlink, we can't deny, Starlink still has a lot of operator partnerships, but we have heard some operators don't want to rely on a constellation of an erratic billionaire, preferring to go with other LEO constellation rivals, such as OneWeb. But we've talked about sort of the 3 main unmodified direct-to-device market constellations, but I think it's important to look at the wider constellation landscape. And to do that, we need to look at the 3 key orbital planes. Now, the first is LEO, which we've already spoken about. And this is the area that's gaining the most excitement. You'll see it mostly in the news. And the satellites in this orbital plane can offer low latency connectivity. Now, some of the big names are in this area, including Globalstar and Iridium. But we think, and I'm going to cover more on other LEO constellations in the next slide. GEO, or geostationary orbit, a constellation that are about 35,000 kilometers away from Earth, and GEO satellites offer the most coverage, with one satellite being able to cover up to a third of the Earth's surface because they're so far away. They have high latency, so are less useful for time-critical applications, and established companies such as Viasat or Inmarsat use GEO satellites. But Skylo, a newer innovative company, is also integrating the technology into its offering. MEO, or medium Earth orbit, is the in-between between the 2 orbital planes I've just discussed and doesn't have a huge number of inhabitants, with CES being the major constellation there. However, due to the increasingly crowded nature of LEO and the improving technology that can reduce latency, I believe it could become more populated in MEO in the near-term future. On the left of your screen, you can see a number of companies that are utilising a multi-orbit constellation to create a multi-orbit offering that combines the best of both orbital planes, and Eutelsat OneWeb is the most prominent constellation that's doing that. But we've talked about on that slide we showed a lot of constellations, and all of those constellations and more are analysed in our Spotlight report. But I thought it would be important to sort of dive a bit deeper onto a few. So firstly, we've got Amazon with its Project Kuiper. This company has qualities similar to Starlink, with significant funds desired to build thousands of LEO satellites, and a billionaire owner with his own rocket company. The constellation will look to roll out quickly, in part due to regulations imposed by the FCC for it to do so. Sateliot is a LEO satellite company headquartered in Spain that offers satellite IoT services. The company is offering a standards-based solution on the 3GPP roadmap and is targeting revenue of €1 billion by 2030. A number that, if it gets close to, will mean it's had a big impact on the satellite industry. My colleague Luke has done some excellent research on the satellite IoT market, and full details of which can be found in the Spotlight report. Telesat historically has been a geostationary constellation and is aiming to become a multi-orbit constellation by launching Telesat Lightspeed. The key USP of Telesat is that it will be able to offer guaranteed minimum and maximum speeds, and will offer a B2B service similar to what we see with Eutelsat OneWeb. In this report, we've also analysed 3 Chinese constellations, Guoyuan, G-Space and G60. It's clear China is investing heavily in this area as they look to catch up with the West, as they launch lots more satellites into LEO before the area becomes too crowded, because some experts are saying that LEO can only hold up to 100,000 satellites. The constellations will then have a big impact not just in China and Asia, but other regions around the world, such as Africa, as they look to compete with Western constellations, and possibly China will use this technology as part of its Belt and Road Initiative to gain influence in different regions. But speaking of regions, let me pass you over to Kester as he talks you through some operator partnerships with different regions across the globe.
Thank you very much indeed, Joe. So we've heard already then from Vishali about expectations for satellite in the device market, and also from Joe about how the different constellations are shaping up. But what sort of opportunity does satellite bring to telecom operators? Well, this slide summarises some of the main advantages, although I should stress that our primary view is that satellite will only ever prove a complementary technology to terrestrial networks rather than a direct replacement. So firstly, it's about connecting the unconnected, principally the 350 million people throughout the world, many in emerging markets who still cannot get online due to unavailability of telecom infrastructure. Satellite is also about offering wider area coverage in more mature markets, expanding existing service availability into hard-to-reach places. Now, this includes, for example, cellular backhaul. And in this area, for example, in the UK, operators have been working with Starlink as part of commitments to the government's Shared Rural Network programme. Satellite can also bolster enterprise strategies for operators, for example, in sectors such as maritime, agriculture, defence and aviation, including through private networks and IoT. A more near-term opportunity is from backup or temporary solutions to businesses, or to aid humanitarian efforts in response to natural disasters or conflicts. Lastly, satellite will also help shape future industry standards, particularly as operators look to the 6G era. Already, 3GPP's Release 17, which was frozen in 2022, included requirements for non-terrestrial networks for the first time. Now let's talk about the US. This market is the epicenter of satellite activity, and as Vishali has already mentioned, our forecasts show that it is dominating early usage and uptake, particularly in the direct-to-device market. Why is it playing such a prominent role? Well, beyond being the home of some of the leading satellite providers, we see several reasons. It's a mature and affluent market with high average spend on telecom services. Of course, it's got vast geography, including many places with little habitation. And there's increasingly a fierce battle breaking out for network supremacy among the 3 carriers in the market. Now, the catalyst for satellite in the US has very much been the flagship industry partnership between T-Mobile and Starlink, signed in 2022 with the aim to offer broader coverage to mobile users. We're expecting a commercial direct-to-device offer for person-to-person messaging almost any time, representing the first such launch for Starlink with a telco. Data services are also on the pair's near-term roadmap after the 2 companies completed a video call using a low Earth orbit satellite and unmodified smartphone back in May. However, despite their keen ambitions, we do retain our view, set out earlier by Vishali, that 2027 is the likeliest timeframe for the industry to begin offering data services on smartphones via a direct satellite connection. But that being said, T-Mobile will be keen to hasten things along. An important factor to remember is that Starlink is only offering a 1-year period of exclusivity before opening the service to rival carriers. And these could include AT&T and Verizon, which, in an apparent response to T-Mobile, recently announced a partnership with Starlink rival AST SpaceMobile for direct-to-device services. And both carriers are investors in the company. Now, as Joe has pointed out, AST SpaceMobile is far behind Starlink in terms of launching satellites, but its claims to be able to deliver a full space-based broadband service has exciting potential for the industry and brings crucial opportunities to differentiate against T-Mobile. AT&T and Verizon have both agreed to share some of their 850 MHz spectrum with AST SpaceMobile. And these low-band airwaves are important in terms of boosting overall coverage as they travel further and propagate better into buildings, while also being compatible with most smartphones in use in the US. In another partnership in the US, Verizon in August signed a deal with Skylo. And this really, to us, cements a total change of tack from the carrier, moving from being a technology skeptic to a potential market leader in this area in just a matter of months. So the two players will use Verizon's L-band spectrum to support a direct-to-device offer likely to launch in the early part of next year. It will be limited initially to emergency SOS and location sharing, before later expanding to include person-to-person messaging. One of the main drawbacks, however, is limited initial device availability due to the L-band spectrum requirements. So initially, only Google's Pixel 9 series will be supported, representing just a couple of million potential customers for the carrier to go after, before Samsung's latest Galaxy devices are expected to be added to the mix early next year. Now, in contrast to the US, the case for telecom operators to deploy satellite services in Europe is far less clear-cut. And this is reflected in our Spotlight forecasts, which shows only a tiny level of take-up across the region during the period to 2028. The main reason is the extensive existing deployment of fibre and mobile services, and the lack, of course, of vast unpopulated or scarcely populated regions, which have so far limited the incentive for operators to push hard into this opportunity. There's also the challenge of Europe's fragmented telecoms market structure. Small countries sharing multiple borders brings complex challenges such as signal interference and a lack of spectrum harmonisation. But still, there have been some pockets of activity, notably in France, where Orange has already launched a commercial consumer offer. Vodafone and Telefonica continue to test and experiment, while BT says that it believes that satellite can support its ambition to offer high-speed connectivity anywhere in the UK by 2028. And last year, in partnership with OneWeb and the government, it brought internet services for the first time to the 30 permanent residents of the tiny Lundy Island, located off England's southwest coast. Now, I wanted to mention two other markets as well that CCS Insight is keeping close tabs on. So Australia has become a hotbed of recent satellite activity, as the country's leading telecom operators have scurried to partner with satellite providers as they look to extend connectivity across the country's vast landmass. And this vast landmass and availability of coverage is very much illustrated by Telstra's mobile coverage map, shown there on the left, which reveals huge areas still lacking in any form of signal. Early this year, Telstra partnered with Starlink to launch a consumer satellite home broadband offer. That's the advert on the right there. While rival Optus is also working with Starlink, but has chosen to focus instead on the direct-to-smartphone opportunity. And then finally, satellite also offers many opportunities to enhance connectivity in India. So in the world's most populous nation, almost 40% of people still cannot access the internet, with the majority living in rural areas. And this threatens a major digital divide, given the strong progress deploying telecom networks by the leading providers in India, Reliance Jio and Bharti Airtel, in major towns and cities. To help address this, Reliance Jio has set up a new satellite broadband service called Jio Space Fibre, targeting people living in remote places. It's based on the satellite operator SES, promising to cover millions of people yet to be connected. However, a planned commercial launch, originally slated for this year, appears to be held up owing to regulatory hurdles over spectrum. Well, to wrap up before we go into Q&A, let me just share 5 leading takeaways from today. So first of all, the direct-to-smartphone opportunity, which our Spotlight homes in on, will quickly become the leading satellite use case based on total revenue, overtaking home broadband in 2027 and remaining far ahead of IoT. Apple is dominating the device landscape for satellite-enabled smartphones and will still have a more than 50% share of this market by 2028, despite growth from Samsung and other Android brands. Low Earth orbit has proved a hotbed of recent satellite activity, fueling the direct-to-device market. And as the tracking in our report shows, this space will become even more competitive, notably through the launch of major constellations in China and planned deployments from Amazon's Kuiper division. The US, as I've just been talking about, is set to dominate early satellite adoption, catalyzed by the flagship industry partnership between T-Mobile and Starlink, as well as a growing focus from AT&T and Verizon. But as far as Europe is concerned, however, the potential is less clear-cut due to existing terrestrial network deployments and possible regulatory challenges. Still, some of the region's providers are targeting niche opportunities, and we are monitoring closely these as part of our ongoing research. So just before we embark on the Q&A, a quick reminder of our upcoming Satellite Spotlight report, which delves into all the areas covered today in far more detail. It's a 90-page PDF with accompanying Excel datasheet, and we'd be very happy to share any further information about it with you. Feel free to email info@ccsinsight.com for details. And then finally, our last webinar of this year is on the 17th of December at 4 p.m. GMT, looking ahead at developments in spatial computing next year. So that's today's presentation. We'll now move on to the Q&A section. And just as a reminder, please use the questions tab if you would like to ask a question. If we can't get them through all of them today, we'll try and follow up wherever possible. And in addition to myself, Vishali and Joe, Luke Pearce, another author on this report, has joined us for this section. So I can see some questions are coming through already, which is fantastic. And I'm going to jump to one that straight away has caught my attention. How do you think the Trump presidency will impact the satellite telecom market? That feels like a good question. Who would like to take that one? Joe, I don't know whether you've got some views.
Yeah, you got them. Yeah, so well, as I mentioned in that presentation, Elon Musk is going to become a big part of the next Trump administration. So he's going to become the co-head of the government efficiency department. And apart from being that quite ironic, it also offers him sort of great influence, great power to influence spectrum decisions, spectrum auctions. Now, the thing with the spectrum auctions is recent. I think it was March 2023, the FCC's right to offer spectrum auctions sort of lapsed. So the first thing that Musk will probably be wanting to do is to get that to get a Congress to approve the FCC's ability to start doing auctions again. I think another thing that's probably going to change is that the new chair of the FCC, Brandon Carr, who was a co-author of Project 25, which is a sort of a Trump playbook for how to approach his next term. He was talking about things like making spectrum more available, so he'll be a great ally of Musk. I think all these changes to the FCC could also impact the BEAD initiative, which is a kind of a broadband initiative to improve, sort of reduce the digital divide across America. Now, that's been mainly a fiber-based solution, but I think Trump went on a podcast recently and said that, well, fiber costs so much, which it does to sort of get it to rural areas, and he was saying, well, Elon can do it for next to nothing with his satellite service. So I think that's definitely another area to be aware of. So it definitely could change massively, I think, with sort of deregulation and then also with the BEAD initiative. One thing I would preface all of this is that Elon Musk has got a bit of an ego. Donald Trump has got a bit of an ego. And I don't think, apart from maybe Nikki Haley, no one from the previous Trump administration kind of survived it on good terms with Donald Trump. So we'll see if their friendship lasts long enough to make these big changes.
Thank you very much, Joe. That very, very comprehensive answer. Right, we have got several questions coming in. I'm going to take this one next, I think. Do you see Apple charging for two-way messaging in the near future? Charlie, do you want to have a crack at that one, or maybe with some support from Luke?
Yeah, I can take that. So as I've already mentioned, Apple are currently, leading in this space. And as for two-way messaging, they are currently already offering this for free for the first 2 years. However, with the introduction, I think, of more smartphone manufacturers, Apple will want to stay competitive, and the way that they can do this is if they start charging. How this looks, we're not entirely sure, but we know that Apple right now have got the lead, and they're not likely to want to give that up. So we'll see how it all plays out.
Fantastic, thank you, Vishali. So another question here, just around the revenue slide I think we showed at the start, around how these revenues are determined based on the willingness to pay to have 100% coverage. What about if you are in a country with the coverage, which is very good? Do we have, Luke, perhaps a definition of that, or is that something we can share today?
Yeah, so obviously within the report there's a lot of detail about the revenue models and how we calculated them. Generally, they would take in a different variety of variables and assumptions as well, which we're happy, of course, to discuss with clients of the report in a bit more detail if we had a bit more time. But generally, I would say the number focuses on the service revenues paid either directly or indirectly in some cases from users as well. That's, I think, kind of Joe and Kester highlighted that with the T-Mobile and Starlink deal, T-Mobile are planning to kind of just offer that for their premium subscribers and absorb the cost of that plan. As Vishali just mentioned, Apple currently having that service for free at the moment, and so it remains to be seen a little bit in terms of monetization models, but generally our expectation is that it's pretty difficult to get people to pay for over-the-top services for satellite, and a lot of this will be accrued as value through the partnerships themselves, whether that's a cost saving for the operators in terms of not having to deploy as many base stations and coverage sites, or offering it within a premium subscription plan to certain subscribers to help with that monetization picture as well. Or in the case of Apple, maybe including it within an Apple One subscription like they do with some of their other service models as well. So yeah, lots more detail about the assumptions and revenue, which is a juicy part of this market in the report.
Thank you, Luke. A couple of questions I'm going to have a crack at. So one was around HAPS platforms that were mentioned. Where do we see that opportunity? So HAPS, which is high altitude platforms, which effectively is some of the more kind of temporary connectivity solutions that can be placed into the skies. Clearly, this is a far more low cost opportunity, one that perhaps is more straightforward to deploy, although perhaps one that doesn't have the full scale advantages that maybe the satellite does. I think from an industry and a telecom operator position, I think it forms a part of a broader airborne strategy that could encompass satellite, HAPS, and other solutions. And I think it's a matter of bringing them all into the mix and using those that are best for different particular use cases. Then we had another one around how we expect operators to react to direct-to-device, considering the fees operators have paid to regulators for spectrum. So I think this feels to me around what do we feel about the direct-to-device market? Do we think this is perhaps one that's going to interfere with operators' strategies? Could it override some of their existing deployments and obviously everything they've invested in over the years? I personally don't see it as a direct threat to operators. I think that satellite will, as I mentioned earlier, be very much a complementary technology. But I do think you highlighted an interesting issue in that we are going to have some concern. I think there's another question that's targeting this area as well, just around regulation and around availability of spectrum, and around some of the interference challenges that we heard about earlier on in the year as well. Good, right, we're running a little low on time. I'm just flicking through the questions as we speak. Okay, yeah, so we've got time for a few more. So we have this one here. Given that Apple recently invested again in Globalstar, do you see them investing in voice and data capabilities? Vishali, can I hand that one to you?
I can take that.
Thank you.
So for those unfamiliar, Apple recently invested a further $1.5 billion into the partnership with Globalstar. And so from this, we think it seems incredibly plausible that Apple will take satellite capabilities to the next level. And they may even be the first of the smartphone manufacturers to offer this. It's hard to say right now, but we think, it's very unlikely that such a data-rich service will be offered for free. And as Luke has already mentioned, it might be incorporated within an Apple One subscription. However, there are some operators in countries where satellite is more developed, like the United States or Australia, and they might just surpass Apple in providing this capability, potentially as part of a satellite package, but that, remains to be seen, because voice and data, we don't see it coming into the market any earlier than 2026, maybe 2027. But yeah, those are just some ideas we have about how it could be, provided.
Thank you, Vishali. Another one I've noticed, it says, I'm surprised you didn't mention the potential for satellite services in Africa. Can you share any thoughts? Okay, I'm happy to have a crack at that one. It's a valid point. We do cover Africa in the Spotlight report. Clearly, it's a vast country. It's very much suited to the satellite opportunity, given the number of unconnected communities and the fact that telecoms infrastructure is still in the process of being deployed. There are challenges as well, which we do look at in the Spotlight as well, around regulation and coexistence with existing terrestrial networks. But there is ongoing activity there as well, which perhaps we didn't highlight in the webinar, but we're certainly aware of a lot of tests and partnerships and trials going on in the Africa region. And Starlink is also very active there as well. I think it's selling now directly in 15 different markets. One other interesting point on Africa as well is the concept of what's known as load shedding. So this is where there's a surge in demand for power, and some infrastructure services, like, for example, fixed line broadband, are switched off, and that can leave people without connectivity for several hours at a time. So that's a great example of where perhaps satellite can step in and act as a backup. Okie dokie. There was one other, I think perhaps we've got time for one more that's caught my eye. How critical is at this stage the battery life of satellite connected devices in holding back progress in adoption? Any volunteers, Luke? I don't know if you've got.
I can take it. I mean, certainly that has been an inhibitor of the last decade or so, particularly with kind of early constellations, particularly in GEO, but also LEO as well. And having those dedicated satellite phones with very large antennas, very large batteries to be able to communicate with satellite. I would say that it's still an issue, particularly in IoT and other verticals. There are things that are paving the way to make that less strain on the battery. A lot of the work can now be done on the ground stations themselves, rather than up in the satellite and the user equipment as well. So there are the components, particularly in the cases where kind of Vishali was mentioning in some of those smartphones in the modified devices. There are still modifications necessary on the hardware. So that's some stuff being done on the whether that's a kind of a specialist antenna or some or the SoC itself. But in the case of kind of unmodified with SpaceX and AST Space Mobile, because that's using terrestrial spectrum and terrestrial infrastructure from the mobile network operators, that's all being handled away from the device. So there's not as much strain on the device itself. And a lot of this is also part of the 3GPP release 17, 18 and 19 standards towards 5G NTN as well. So there are some still challenges, but certainly there are ways to overcome that. It's certainly not as big as a problem as it was a few years ago.
Absolutely. Thanks, Luke. Great answer. Well, sadly, we're out of time. Thank you. Sorry we didn't get through every single question. We had a load coming through, but thank you for everyone for joining today and for all the comments and the questions that we received. We look forward very much to seeing you on our next webinar in a few weeks' time. But in the meantime, thank you very much for joining us, and goodbye, and we'll no doubt see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.